Good afternoon and welcome, Dr. Brown. I'd like to do a mic and camera check if we can, please.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
You
Oh,
see
and I
me?
can see you too.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Shockley. I see you've joined us. Can we do a mic and camera check, please?
Hi, yes.
I
Forgive me
hear
for
and see you.
always coming through the attendee way. I don't know why. Sorry about that.
That's no problem at all. Just glad you're here. Thank you.
So I'm gonna wait for you, moderator, to give me the cue to get started. Just let me know.
You bet. We're going to give Member De La Rosa just a couple more minutes.
Sure. Thank you.
We'll start in about 2 minutes. Thanks.
Hi, Madison. Hope you're doing well. How you doing? How are you?
Doing great, Dr. B. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Busy, 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 busy.
Yeah. Thank you for being here again and spending some of your busy schedule with us.
Very welcome. I'm sorry. I'm going to take my camera off. I'm trying to eat a little salad real quick.
Sure. Member Payan, I see you're here with us. How you doing?
I sure am. I'm well. How are you doing? I'm prepping to head to New York tomorrow, first conference in 2 years.
Okay. Yeah. Getting back to after COVID. Um, yeah. I guess 2 years ago we'd be doing this committee in person.
We sure
A
would.
little over 2 years ago now, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's that whole new normal thing, you know?
Yep, yep. I don't mind not having to do the travel though, I'll tell you that much.
Oh, truth. Truth.
But it
Yeah,
would it would be nice to at some point maybe have an in-person meeting and meet each other in person.
I think it's good. It makes all the difference because then it's like in between, the meeting, either beginning or ending, you get a chance to really connect with everybody, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
That's true. I was just in New York for a conference 2 weeks ago, and it was wonderful. I hadn't been in New York for many years, but it was nice to actually be in a space where you could see folks and just collaborate, and it's different. It's really
Yeah.
different. Trying to get used to being, physically with people is it's an adjustment.
I have to explain to people sometimes when I have awkward moments. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm still acclimating to being in front of people again.
Exactly.
Were you surprised by the changes in New York when you went?
Absolutely. I hadn't been to New York maybe in 6 or 7 years, so it was different when we were in Brooklyn. And yeah, the conference was at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which I had never been on their campus, but it's huge. But it was great. But it was 90 degrees. I mean, it was, remember 2 days ago, when last week, yeah, it'll be 2 weeks. It was, 90 degrees, and then it went down to 50 degrees the day after the conference. So it was a little challenging. No one was prepared for that kind of heat wave. And so, but it was very informative. Made some great contacts, And I think we're going to see more and more. We're going to have our commission meetings in person. I think starting in June, the city is now requiring that all, public meetings are now in person again. So we're going to see how that works out. So I think we're really coming full circle from COVID now.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I, I,
Yeah.
it, I,
Hey,
think I think Hmm.
I just want to make a note to the moderator. I'm getting some messages that people are having trouble getting into the room. Not sure if other people are experiencing that, but somebody tried to get in and was kicked out. Not sure if they have the wrong link or not, but I got a couple messages.
All right, let me look into that. And right now, oh, Christine De La Rosa is here.
Oh, great.
Okay, so we are set. Are we ready to go? I will have one of our techs look at any issues from a tech side.
Appreciate that. Yep. Yeah. If we have a quorum, then we can move forward. We're ready to go.
Yep.
Hi, Member De La Rosa. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. So we're going to get started in a moment by taking roll of the committee. But before we get started, I just want to say thank you, a special thank you to the fellow committee members for taking the time out to consistently do this. I know it's a significant time commitment, and some of these meetings can roll pretty long. I'm going to do as much as I can as the chair to operate these meetings efficiently as we can and make sure we're continuing to be productive. But I want to just thank you all for your special commitment to doing this. And then also those of the public, we've got a really great cross section of stakeholders who have been committed to having the discussion about these important topics around social equity, and not just participating in the main committee meetings, but taking the extra time to participate in these subcommittee meetings. I just want to say I'm grateful for that. And in the spirit of that, we want to be productive as possible. So I'm going to try to keep us right on our agenda as we go through this, and want to ask that in the spirit of that, people try to stay right on topic of where we are in the agenda and keep comments related to specifically where we are on the agenda. We want to get all the feedback we can, but we want it to be focused so we can continue to be productive. So I just wanted to start with that. And with that, moderator, we take the roll.
You betcha. Dr. Imani Brown,
Present.
Sarah Payan,
present.
Christine De La Rosa,
Present.
and Chair Shockley.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right. Thank you for joining us for the meeting of the Social Equity Subcommittee. Today, we'll be discussing specific data points that would be most impactful for the DCC to collect in order to assess the presence and impact of cannabis businesses and the current definition of social equity in the context of cannabis businesses, individuals, and licensees. And this conversation is kind of a continuation of our last subcommittee meeting, where we voted in a motion to recommend to the main committee that there be a statewide social equity assessment. And members of the committee wanted to add more detail and color to that recommendation by adding specifics about what that assessment should include and different parameters of that. And then after we go further into that discussion in our agenda, the following topic will be opening up a discussion about the social equity definition. We we may or may not take action on that topic today, but I wanted to start opening up that conversation as well, to continue, as that was one of the priorities that we discussed at the beginning of creating this committee. So let's see, we'll be taking public comment on each of the agenda items when we come to them. So please hold any of your comments on those topics until we arrive at the agenda item that you wish to comment on. At this time, I'd like to invite members of the public to provide comments on agenda item number 2, items not on the agenda. So this is a time for the public to, if you have comments that are not related to what we're going to discuss in this, make those comments, but please hold your specific comments for the agenda items to the later public comment time. Let's see. With that said, moderator, will you please open the floor for public comment for the items not on the agenda today?
Yes, absolutely. We'll open that right now. Attendee Jillian, I have just sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Good afternoon to everyone on the committee. My name is Jillian Xavier. I am the first woman to open a cannabis testing lab in the city of Long Beach. However, $8 million later of grant money, the city is not disseminating the money on to social equity applicants. I'm at the point where the state application is on hold due to getting plans redone. I've asked the city for help and I've got a blatant no. We need to hold these cities accountability on where is the money. I was told they had 2.5 in the bank, 1.4 on the way from GoBiz, but you can't give me $10,000 to move to my next stage. July 8th is when the state is saying my application will be null and void. We need your help to really look into the cities and see where is this money going. Because if you have money in the bank, you should be able to help us. It's like a consensus. Some of us have 10-day notices. Some of us I'm about to be evicted from our places. If you have a verified need, they should be able to help social equity. So I'm asking today that the 1.4 that's spending from GoBiz probably need to be retracted because the money is not coming our way. I get on here every time I say the same thing, me, Mariel, Tamika, Edgar, everyone that get Dimitri that get on here and it's not being heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Attendee M. Burial, I've sent you a request to unmute. Actually, attendee Yvette.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, go ahead.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, Yvette.
Just a minute, we need to send her.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yvette, can you hear us? All right, let's move on.
Want to move on and try to come back to her?
Yes. So Luis Rivera, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Good afternoon. My name is Luis Rivera. I'm with Social Equity LA, a 501c3 nonprofit here in Los Angeles. I'm also a social equity owner and operator. And first, I commend all the good work and all the people on board, on the board. I appreciate we have you guys advocating for us. I just asked if we can really look at creating better tax programs or incentives or deferrals for social equity operators. Really, the cost of doing business in this industry is just far too high, and for us to truly compete, we would need to have significant breaks, and such as potential tax breaks and deferment, or something that really can help us get ahead. So, after a year of operating and indebted to the CDTFA, I understand firsthand, the difficulty and the burden that places on operators. So if anything we can do to just continue pushing that, I believe Bradford has a bill 512 in the Senate, and anything we can do to really push on that and or create incentives for us would be great. So thank you for the work and thank you for the time.
Thank you. Attendee Anthony Avalos, I've sent you a request to unmute. Attendee Anthony Avalos.
Avalos. that, thank you very much. My name is Anthony Avalos. I am a co-founder of the Council of Equity Advocacy, San Diego. And I want to bring the idea of looking at the harm caused by the war on drugs to identify benefits within cannabis social equity programming, specifically benefits that include behavioral health services, that include other types of support that would speak to the comprehensive harm that was caused by the war on drugs, right? We're talking about economic harm, obviously, but we're also talking about environmental harm, social harm, human harm. And so while we look to rectify harms from the war on drugs, we need to better identify what that means. And I think that we, along with some of the topics that we're discussing today, we also have to identify other avenues in which we can exercise this idea of rectifying harm. And so entrepreneurship is something that we have eyes on, and many people are experiencing the attempts to allow inclusion. But again, how do we heal the community, specifically those who aren't interested in necessarily cannabis business, but need to benefit from the cannabis industry? Thank you.
Thank you. M. Burial, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. Great afternoon, everyone. With giving all glory and honor to God. As she said, my name is Muriel Burrell, also known as May Burrell. I've been in the industry for quite some time. Currently, I'm a verified equity applicant in the city of Long Beach to acquire a micro license there. Before that, I had a facility in LA and worked with Madison and Imani and pushing equity out in LA. And now, having seen it in two sister cities, equity needs more help. And not only does equity need more help, but the local jurisdictions that's kind of overseeing equity need to be micromanaged or advised. Same way as how you all are advising the state, different cities need to be advised because they're getting these large sum of money and they're increasing their staff and they're increasing all of this direct technical assistance. But today, as we're going to talk about the data, the numbers behind it don't show that many equity owners either own 100% of their equity or the major share beyond the 51% in getting an investor. And if we're talking about social equity and repairing, the harm that the war on drugs did, beyond talking about taxes, we need to talk about actually operating and these cities actually helping with the funds that they have. Long Beach isn't helping. They have the money and they see the equity applicants are drowning, literally so many stories from people
30 seconds.
who even helped the city to put up their program, and yet the city stands there with their hands behind their back, not helping. I've CC'd you all in emails all this week to let you know about what's going on. So I do ask that y'all help so that we can change the game. Thank you.
Thank you. Yvette, I've sent you a request to unmute. Yvette, you're showing unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yay, yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, committee. I want to find out if you are following SB 51, what the status is, and are you going to continue monitoring or will you start monitoring so you can keep the equity community updated on what's happening with SB 51, which is the provisional license extension bill? Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment on agenda item number 2? Eliana Green, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Green. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at the Hood Incubator. I want to piggyback off of Yvette and encourage the committee to considering a motion to support Senate Bill 51, which will extend provisional licensing for social equity operators as the barriers to entry for those folks are about to drastically be increased now that provisional licensings are gone and most of the jurisdictions are just now rolling out their social equity program. So we really want to stress the importance of this since the provisional licensings lower barrier to entry and make it easier for folks to start their business and create revenue while they're waiting for full annual licensing. Thank you.
Thank you. 6 asterisks. I've sent you a request to unmute.
I think that what one of the previous callers was talking about as state oversight for the equity program with the local jurisdictions is spot on. Yes, they may qualify and get these grants for the local jurisdictions to distribute. However, the way that they're doing things has been proven to be a little bit sketchy in certain circumstances. Let's put it that way. But some sort of state oversight as to how they're doing that, aside from just, approving their application with their point system, making sure that they're living up to what they say they're doing. And perhaps a little bit more oversight in the interpretation of the parameters as they're filling out their application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Tamika Boyce, I've sent you a request to unmute. Tamika Boyce. There you go.
Guys, my name is Tamika Boyce. I'm currently an approved social equity applicant within the city of Long Beach. I would also like to piggyback a few of the previous comments that were made in regards to some additional oversight at the local levels, especially when it comes to the spending and monies that are doled out to local cities like Long Beach and some others that are designated for social equity. And seeing that, in the 5 years that Long Beach has had a social equity program, being that there's only one current licensed operator, and you guys are talking about data and the numbers and looking at barriers to entry, really digging in a little bit more, providing some additional oversight to see what is going on, why that there's only one in 5 years, and others that are currently in the process are going over or going under rather, while money is sitting there literally ready to be doled out, but not making its way to where it's needed, which is to the operators, the applicants, and people to be able to stay afloat. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else want to comment on agenda item number 2? This is for items that are not on today's agenda. All right, Chair Shockley, I see no further requests for comment. Would you like to close public comment on agenda item number 2?
Yes, let's close public comment and move on to agenda item number 3, which is items for discussion and possible recommendation. This discussion will be a continuation of our discussion from the last meeting about specific data points that would be most impactful for DCC to collect in order to assess the presence and impact of equity businesses in California. There's a lot to cover in this agenda item. So members, I would like for the subcommittee to discuss each question one at a time, and then we can go to public comment on the entire set of questions. So I'd like to start with the first set of questions on the agenda under this item, which are, what data does the subcommittee recommend be collected about businesses that apply for or hold cannabis licenses? And the second one is what data does the subcommittee recommend think would be helpful for understanding the equity status at the state and or local level. So let's start with that first question. What does the subcommittee recommend be collected at businesses about businesses that apply for or hold cannabis licenses? And I open the floor to the subcommittee members.
Sure, Shockley. I think one thing that would be good to be collected is if they have a non-equity partner and what the agreement are, and I don't know if there'd be something about share of ownership with that.
Okay. Uh, so basically all the partners that are involved in the application for the license, social equity or not.
Yeah, I think that that would be good. I think also it would help us determine a pattern if there's predatory practices that are still continuing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I know in Los Angeles, LA does a pretty thorough job at collecting all the data about who's in the ownership. Um, any thoughts on that, Dr. Brown? What could be added to what's currently in the state application?
Um, I think I would like to differentiate when we talk about getting data in terms of, you know, ownership. We talking about across the board or just for equity owners? Because I would like to see more data collected across the board, and then we could do apples to apples, right?
Yes,
I like to
absolutely.
see, so much of the robust information that we ask of our equity applicants, we ask of general applicants as well.
Yep.
And then we would be able to do a better comparison in terms of, you know, income, education, all the different things that are asked of equity applicants. I want to see ask across the board.
Yeah. I'd like to see racial data at least asked. I don't know, and I don't know if it can be made mandatory or not, but making sure that there's, a request for the racial makeup of the ownership of a business. Uh, that would be helpful, uh, a helpful data point that I don't think is currently collected.
I know we've talked a lot about, the state doesn't want to ask for demographic information, but I think it's imperative to really get an opportunity to address, we talk about folks who were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. We all know that 40% of people incarcerated are Black and brown folks, right? So if we get this kind of demographic information about who's getting licenses and the like, find out their race, their ethnicity, their gender, their veteran status, education, income levels, if they've been convicted. I mean, that's an issue too. I mean, arrest or conviction is really different. You could be arrested and never do it one day and be a white male, but then you know, you qualify for, a social equity person. And I don't think that's the spirit that Prop 64 is meant, right? It's not really meant, that's not the spirit of Prop 64. And so I would like to see more demographic information and data in that regard across the board so we can compare apples to apples.
Got it. And then the other question in this first set is what data does the subcommittee recommend or think would be helpful for understanding the equity status at the state or local level? Are there specific data points that uh, would be helpful in understanding who is equity?
So I have a little bit of confusion here. If I can ask for a point of
Sure.
clarity, that would be great. So the first was, collected about businesses that apply for or hold cannabis licenses. So that's across the board, which I think is what Dr. Brown was talking about, apples to apples. And then what data does the subcommittee recommend would be helpful for understanding their equity status in the state and or local level? Are we talking about there being the people that are holding the cannabis licenses,
I believe so.
those holding social equity cannabis licenses is what we're looking for? Do we not know who those folks are municipality by municipality already? I'm asking this question because I know like in Oakland,
Yeah,
we
I
know
would
who
imagine
those
so.
are. Yeah,
So yeah, so from a local level and then also at the state level, it can be different in
right.
certain scenarios.
So I think
Right.
what we're trying to do here is figure out whether or not this has been a successful endeavor. So I think when we're looking for data points, we need to think about how many social equity licenses were given by the local jurisdiction and the state, and then the state, and how many of those are currently active, and how many of those were given up because they could not find the capital to activate the license. Kind of what I always think around social equity licenses, it's like being given a golden ticket, right? Here's your golden ticket, you have the license, but never being able to realize the promise of the license. So you can say, I don't remember exactly what it was in LA, but I think like 200 or 300 licenses went out to social equity applicants, dispensary side. I'm thinking dispensary. How many of those today are active? Meaning, not only are they still paying the yearly cost to keep the, the license active, and how many of those have opened their doors? I use LA because it's a big jurisdiction, but we can also do that for Fresno. We can also do that. I think like in Fresno, they gave out 9 or 11 and only 2 are open today. So if I was to look at the data for that, I would say that for the Fresno municipality, that was a failure, because even though they gave out 8 licenses, only 2 are currently active. And if almost would I would consider that the other 9 licenses are not activated, and hundreds of licenses in other jurisdictions that are not activated is because of lack of access to capital. And I think based on what we've heard here for the last few meetings that we've done as the equity folks and also as the larger general, 30-person group, is that our social equity, our small businesses, our farmers, our cultivators are really screaming about how they don't have the capital to realize that promise. And what ends up happening, and this is consistent across beyond cannabis, right? We can look at SBA loans, we can look at other things, is that we're told, hey, we gave you a chance. We gave you a license. It's not our fault that you didn't know what to do with it, when it absolutely is the fault of the lack of access to capital. If we want to really go after the state to bring that capital to these businesses, the data that we need to do is like, you had Prop 64. This is how it was supposed to impact people who are harmed by the war on drugs. This is how it's failed them. This is how much money you're going to need to set aside from the cannabis tax, not to go into the general fund, but to go into the fund that's going to be able to give the resources to these social equity applicants, so that you don't have a 5% success rate or 10% success rate, but that you have a 55% success rate. So every time I'm thinking about what data do I need to capture, is what data do I need to prove to the government that the taxes that are being paid actually need to go back to the businesses in the terms of non-recoverable grants. I'm not looking at loans for here. And this is the big thing here, because people are going to be like, well, why should they get non-recoverable grants? Why should they get free money? It's not free money. We paid for it with blood, sweat, and tears. We paid for incarceration. We've already paid for this. And the fact that we're being told that we have to get our own money to open up our own businesses is us repairing the harm to the people who harmed us. That's ridiculous. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be repairing our own harm. The government needs to put those dollars towards the businesses that are struggling and give us access to capital.
Member De La Rosa, so if I understand, we're talking about analyzing the lifespan of social equity businesses, and I know we've had some comments from the public about specifically focusing on the track and trace data and looking at the dates of when so different licenses started doing business and how long they were operating and
If they
when
ever
they stopped.
became operational, right? Not only
If
did
they
they ever
ever
become,
if they
yeah.
ever become operational.
To me,
Um,
those are hard data facts that we can take to the governor, to the legislature, and say, this is how many were released, this is how many were realized, this are how many that closed. And I bet you if we did a survey of those people, almost all of them will say it was lack of access to capital.
and along with that data, you could probably see what kind of revenue they did in that process if they operated as well.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, and capturing that data for all licenses, and then narrowing it down to compare equity versus general licenses. I love that. I think that's a great recommendation uh, to put forward.
I agree with
Uh,
Madison. I like that assessment to compare the equity to the general in terms of access to capital, in terms of, how many businesses are still in operation and those kinds of things. And then we would get a better feel for um, how relevant and how impactful, our programs are and just the industry as a whole for equity entrepreneurs. And it also give us a better feel for what kind of resources that are needed most. I mean, access to capital is a large tent. Access to capital as it relates to grants is different than access to capital in terms of banking resources. But until it becomes federally legal, we're not going to have access to capital like most other businesses. We can't get a small business loan. We don't have access to capital because it's federally illegal. And that's it. That's going to continue to be a major issue until the federal government does what they're supposed to do.
And I think that we have to really, Dr. Brown, I totally agree with you. I think we have to really keep an eye on what's happening right now in the banking system, because with SVB, and I think it was Synchronicity, but it could have been somebody else, we've seen a pullback on a lot of the loans for small businesses. So not just so I don't want to count on an SBA loan for the cannabis industry that is trying to do equity. I think we really have to push for the government of the state, of this state, with all of the tax that they're receiving, to reapportion the part of that to be able to support the small businesses. Because especially in California, especially with the run on the banks that are happening right now that we're seeing, I am not confident that those small business loans will be available to us when the federal legalization happens, or even in the state of in the state of California. So what I would really want to really put out there to the people who are on the call is to really start to look at the pressure that we would need to be able to, using this data, about getting our governments to be able to utilize our tax dollars for those small businesses, assuming that the SBA may not be available to us for a long time until federal legalization, or ever, if what's going on with the banks continues to go on.
I think it's not an either or, it's an either and. It's like an ecosystem. Of course, reinvestment money from all the hundreds of millions of dollars brought in by tax dollars, having banking services, banking services that aren't usury. I mean, charging equity entrepreneurs, 25% interest rates, or that should be illegal. So those kinds of things, perhaps the state can have some say in. Credit unions are doing business with the cannabis industry, and they are charging usury interest rates that
yeah.
need to be addressed and looked at. And because all of those things are in play, it creates this predatory investment community, right? So these things are not happening in isolation. It's an ecosystem that all of it is predatory towards equity entrepreneurs.
So members, I'd like to turn to the next set of questions, which is very related to this first set of questions, and we've already kind of been discussing solutions around this one. And it is, let's see, what demographic data does the subcommittee recommend to be collected about owners of cannabis businesses? For example, race, ethnicity, gender, identity, gender identity, veteran status, education level, etc. What I'd like us to do is actually just create a list of specifics to go along with this recommendation. And then the other question is, should the subcommittee recommend data be collected on every individual listed as an owner, only majority owners, or only those owning a specific percentage of the business? So this is another thing, kind of getting into detail about what data should be collected. Uh, so let's start with the first one. What demographic data does the subcommittee recommend be collected about owners of cannabis businesses in general? I'll start with just, I think race is, I already said that. I think that's critical. Race and ethnicity. I think veteran status would be good to collect. Um, Gender identity, the ones that are listed here, all of those I would support.
I think that all of these are important and the kind of not I'm not trying to go back to the last question, but I also think it's important to know whether, you know, personal savings were used for this because when we're looking at generational wealth and asset building and social equity, we shouldn't be depleting people.
That's a fantastic point and contribution there in terms of assessing the impact for sure. Uh, yeah.
I agree with Member Payon. We talk about helping to build generational wealth in the cannabis equity community, as opposed to being complicit in creating generational debt. And I think that's something that we have to take very seriously. So I
Okay.
think that asking about, personal investment would be a data point that we would want to understand across the board. That would also give us a look at, non-equity people and, what kind of access to capital and resources do they have versus equity folks.
Okay, great. And I'm noting these down. So if there are any other uh, suggestions that haven't been mentioned yet in terms of specific data to collect on cannabis businesses.
Sure, Shockley, I have one more around just the fact that we've been having a lot of crime in the industry and it's been impacting everybody, but it's especially troubling when it's impacting social equity communities.
Mhm. So, okay, so how would you, what would that question be?
I think it would be if they've suffered the hardship of theft and rob or I don't maybe of criminal activity because we've seen a lot of really well planned criminal activity affecting equity businesses or there's been a wide swath of break-ins and robberies that have been happening, not to mention the fact of the trauma of people sometimes being in the building and dealing with threats of violence, which,
Yes,
the psychological impact of that is immense on top of everything else that that person may have gone through.
yes, got it. Noted. Okay. If there's no other specific data points to collect there, let's move on to should the
Excuse me, I
subcommittee.
have one more.
Sure. Yes,
Sorry,
please.
Chairman Shockley. I would also want to find out conviction rates, not arrest, but conviction rates across the board. I think that
Okay,
would also help us get a more holistic overview of the industry.
got it. So if you're an owner, were you actually convicted of
Yes,
cannabis?
yes.
Uh, got it.
Or
Convictions.
family members as well, because that impacts the owner's ability to raise funds within their personal network and the like.
Uh-huh. So were you convicted or have a family member that was?
Immediate family member, yes.
An immediate family member. Got it. Noted.
Convicted.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So should the subcommittee recommend data be collected on every individual listed as an owner, or should they just collect data from only majority owners or only those owning a specific percentage of the business? Thoughts on that, committee?
I think in order to get a really well-rounded view of the landscape, we have to have everybody included in that.
Mhm. I agree with that.
That would also depend on the definition of
The
owner. In
definition
Los
of owner.
Angeles, any 20% or more, you're considered an owner. So I don't know if all of the jurisdictions are doing it like that. So this would come from the state, I assume. This would be from the state, not asking the local jurisdictions, but this would be the state asking 51% owners, 33 and a third percent, or what percentage do you own in a business? And to your point, everyone.
Dr. Brown, when the people who own less than 20%, what are they considered?
I guess just investors,
Or interest holders.
interest holders, yes.
Okay.
Financial interest holders.
I think it would be really good to include their demographics as well.
Mhm. Down to what degree though?
That's a
Right?
very
Because
good question because if it's somebody who has 1% interest, how impactful is that? How much of a difference does that make?
But is an interest holder, financial interest owner, this holder, this a euphemism, or isn't it the
well,
same as an investor?
I
What's the
think
difference?
I think it's a difference in the sense that an investor, I think we typically think of like a single individual or entity that's like directing the funds, but this it gets dicey when you get down to really small percentages, like even fractions of percentage of ownership that are broken up. Maybe there's a fund that has 1,000 people who are invested in the fund, and they're not directing the fund. They don't know exactly what businesses the money is being funneled into. Do we need to know who those people are? And so I think that's where you get into differentiating a financial interest holder from an owner.
But they could
And
be a drop down box, if you are a 40%, 25% owner, do you have any ability to have input in the day to day, or do you vote on decisions in the company? I mean, we
uh,
would have to be a little bit more comprehensive to find out exactly their role,
yeah,
right?
I also think the threshold should be lower than 20%. Um, I think 10% would be a stronger uh, threshold. Uh, Anybody with 10% or more interest, I think is a significant holding. And they may not be involved in the day to day, but you would want to know who they are,
Yeah. So you would want all this data on 10% or more interest in companies across the board.
That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
And I think that it still keeps it simple enough. Um, okay, so all those are noted. Let's move to the third set of questions, and then we'll move into public comment, and where the public can give comment on all of these, and then we'll come back into making any motions. So the third set of questions is. What other information does the subcommittee recommend that the DCC collect to assess equity among state cannabis licensees and applicants? And what purpose would this information serve? What other information?
To me, this question is
Specifically.
duplicative.
Yeah, we've been discussing this throughout all these questions pretty
Yeah.
much, right? But I think this is specifically asking about equity businesses because I think we've been talking about what information we should collect in general on all licenses, but I think this one is asking, are there any specific ones that we want to know about equity businesses and what it would be the purpose of that information that we would get from that.
Chairman Shafi, that's not how I read this. It says, what other information does the subcommittee recommend the DCC to collect to assess equity among state cannabis licensees and applicants?
Okay. Okay, you're right. You're right. To assess equity in
Um,
general,
yes,
not
among state
equity
cannabis
business.
licensees and applicants, and what purpose would this information serve? So I
You're
think you're
correct. I
asking
was
if,
misreading that. Thank you. Uh, okay. So do you feel like we've addressed that in these other recommendations, or are there any additional
I,
things?
I think we've adjusted unless somebody has some other data they would like to ask in reference to equity.
Uh-huh. That would be helpful in assessing equitable the industry is overall.
Perhaps a question in terms of, access to capital. We could ask more specific targeted questions in terms of that. How difficult did you find it to raise capital for your business? What was the threshold or how much were you able to raise?
And how much did you have to give up to raise what you raised?
Yes, exactly. What kind of equity share did you have to provide in order to raise these funds? And then compare that across the board. I think
Yeah,
that'll give us a bird's eye view.
I like that a lot. So what was the capital you've raised and what did you have to give up in exchange for that capital?
Well,
Would be
I
an
say what
addition.
kind of equity share or what resources within your company did you have to exchange for some type of investment?
Got it. I like that. And we already have the previous question of how much of your own money and family resources did you are you putting into this? And then this kind of follows up on the next tier of how much did you raise from outside investors and what did you give up in exchange for that?
Oh, one more question perhaps in terms of equity. Um, how difficult did you find accessing compliant real estate?
Mm,
Because we have to talk about compliant real estate in the same breath. That's a major barrier. Access to capital, access to property, and access to affordable legal services in terms of all of our, you know, uh, data and our collection and our feedback. Those are the three major barriers. Those three
okay.
things.
And is that like on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult was it kind of question?
Yes, yes. And even more granular than that, I think sometimes we're too broad and we
Mhm.
don't get the picture that equity folks see it on the ground. It's like how difficult, how many properties did you pursue before you were successful, if at all,
Wow.
right?
Yes.
How willing did you find owners of commercial property willing to lease to you,
Yes. I like
right?
those. I like those, especially how many how'd you put that first one? How many?
How many properties did you pursue before you were successful in securing property?
Yes.
As opposed to
Like
the
that.
general applicant, maybe they pursued two or three before they were successful, and the equity applicant pursued 15.
Yep. Yep. I know my number was 6 or 7. Okay. I like that one a lot. Specifically the how many properties did you pursue before you were successful at securing one? Add that as well.
But you have to do it across the board, or else we're not going to see the equity, if you will, within the cannabis space.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Are there any other recommendations from the committee to help us paint the picture? Different data points the DCC should look at to assess equity among the state cannabis licensees.
I don't have anything else to offer, but I have to say that the real estate one is critical. I totally agree with that.
So we've got real estate and capital covered. Okay, and we'll open it up to the public to get suggestions too. So I'm sure there'll be more things offered. So if that's all the recommendations from the committee, we've had a good discussion, and I'd like to open the floor for public comment.
All right, excellent. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name if you've logged onto the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called into the meeting. For the sake of time, you'll have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you will be muted, and we will move on to the next request for comment. And you have one opportunity to comment on each topic. So let's kick this off with 6 asterisks. I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Hello, this is Paul Hansberry, lovingly and legally, enjoying the repartee. However, there's one thing that it seems to be missing, is that when you're comparing apples and apples, LA County and Southern California is a very, very different demographic, a very different circumstance in Northern California. The war on drugs was an actual war with helicopters and people coming down with weapons from zip lines, eradicating, doing horrific things to the mom and pop in the hills, yanking people out of showers and not clothing them, but cuffing them to the bed, doing horrific, horrible environmental things, spilling diesel fuel everywhere, and then not reporting the corruption, the asset forfeiture, if you will, all these different things, and then not keeping a record of it. Trying to find a record to prove what happened to you is almost impossible. So these sorts of things that, although it sounds like, yeah, we should just be able to do that, it's almost impossible to do because of the nature of the war on drugs in Northern California. When we talk about prevention or the percent of ownership, I mean, there are mom and pops where it's just mom and pop, and they each have 50% ownership. So having 51% ownership to disqualify them if it's just the two people is, silly. So each
30 seconds.
it's site specific and region specific. So I think that if you're going, one size does not fit all when you're giving recommendations to the state because of the different variations in the local jurisdictions and the regions. So thank you very much for considering that.
Thank you. Jillian, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Jillian Xavier again, the first woman to open a cannabis testing lab in the city of Long Beach. What data? Yeah, we need to talk about crime. Real estate, it took me since August 2019, I became social equity. I signed my lease last year as a 5-year lease. So it took some time, some hair loss, some weight loss and stress to move into that arena of having real estate, right? Checking to make sure where the applicants are in the process and how the state can intervene to local cities and help hold them accountable, right? To make sure the incubator plan, which the 32 dispensaries in Long Beach are supposed to help social equity, not only with financial, but maybe with the architect or their legal, their lawyers or whatever the case may be. We need to make sure that social equity holders owners. I hear you with talking about investors, but they're predatory investors. Why am I in this program? Right? I'm in this program to break the curse of not having, to have generational wealth. I own 100% of Drago Cannabis Testing Lab, and that's the way it's going to be. Why did you give these cities $8 million for the city of Long Beach to say, oh, go find an investor, go be a predator? Ownership is
30
important to
seconds.
us as well. So that needs to be taken in account. Thank you.
Thank you. Khalil Ferguson, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you, committee, for this presentation and the discussion. My name is Khalil Ferguson, Deputy Director for the Cannabis Equity Policy Council and the United Core Alliance. We're a 501c4 and 501c3, respectively, in Sacramento. As the committee considers some of these data points, I wanted to point out, or at least bring to your attention, some of the ability for these to be skewed, these data points to be skewed in microeconomic fashions, such as the current crisis looming in the industry right now, where businesses are closing. And just to consider, as you develop these data points, how they may be interpreted based on microeconomic factors that can be skewed either in favor of equity or against equity, wherein you have a number of businesses who are not considered equity closing right now that may show that, at least as speculatively, that the, non-equity businesses close at a higher rate than equity businesses. That's only because equity businesses have yet to enter market. So things like that, I just want the committee to consider as they begin to establish these data points and how they may be used to help advance equity policy goals and outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony Avalos, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Hi again. Thank you so much all for taking the time to have these discussions. I want to uplift the last caller's comments. I do think that we have to take a holistic approach while digging into the weeds. There was something specific that I thought was very interesting, and that was that nobody discussed industry participation or collaboration with equity brands. To what degree, what percentage of equity brands are companies engaging with? What percentage of equity brands are companies, or excuse me, retailers actually stocking on their shelves? Then what are the numbers, right? How often are companies then ordering a second, a third time with equity cultivators or manufacturers? Where's that data, right? Where's the data that indicates whether a non-equity brand within the cannabis industry is interested in participating in the healing of harm from the war on drugs? And so I think that there is some room to wiggle there. And as far as the information that the subcommittee recommends to DCC collect, I think that information on a store-to-store
30 seconds.
basis is excellent. I also think that getting information on hiring practices is excellent. And I also think that it is very important that we know all ownership, right? I understand that it's going to be a heavy pull to get all percentages of owners included, but I do think that it's the only way to truly be able to understand the landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. Edgar Cruz, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Founder of the Cannabis Commerce Council of Long Beach. And I just wanted to go off of what Khalil Ferguson was saying. We have to really, truly understand the current market situation. I myself have talked to over 50 investors. Nobody's touching California, and nobody's touching Southern California, most importantly. It seems like we keep having the same conversations about data that we can find on Google. So we have to re-strategize on how we're going about these committees and focus on the main focuses and objectives on how to build equity, especially understanding how this market and what Khalil was saying, how these non-equity businesses are going under. So if they're already going under, we're already drowning as well too. Thank you.
Thank you. Ignite Daniel, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Committee to address the issues a number of social equity applicants had trying to log on to the seed to apply for the seed grant. I myself attempted to set up a number of accounts for equity applicants who were denied access, stating that they did not qualify, but they were verified social equity applicants. We got no help from DCR or when we called to speak with the Elevate
Sister
people.
Ignite, Sister Ignite, I appreciate your comment, but I'm gonna have to ask you to comment on the agenda item, please.
Oh, you know what? I do apologize because I came in late, and so I honestly did not know exactly what that agenda item is.
No worries. No worries. We're just talking about recommendations for what data the state should collect.
Oh, I do apologize. The state should collect information about race. We should definitely know who owns these licenses, and so that we can understand what percentage are really social equity applicants and really people that were harmed by the war on drugs. We should be better at knowing exactly where people lived and how they came to be, and if it was simply a conviction that got them there, and how many, like, what's the ratio to um, your ethnicity in regards to that.
30
Sorry about
seconds.
that. I yield the
Fantastic. Thank you for your comment.
Okay, thank you.
Hannah Nelson, I've sent you a request to unmute. Hannah Nelson? Looks like she dropped down a little bit. So let's go. Arash Sarush, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. My name is Arash Sarush. I am a policy researcher from the Public Health Institute. I just want to comment in support of these sources of data to collect. And one thing I want to bring light to was there's a lot of specific focus on convictions. And I don't think that's going to give you the full picture. As someone who had their house raided for growing medical cannabis in 2008, and I've gone through the criminal justice system in California for that, I did not get convicted. I accepted a plea, and my charges show up as deferred now because I completed the conditions of my plea. It also took more than a year away from my life and cost me thousands of dollars, and made me start from the ground back up. But I was never convicted in the end. So I just wanted to make sure you focus on arrests and convictions to really see the full picture of people who were affected by the criminalization of cannabis. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, Hannah Nelson, I've sent you a request to unmute. Hannah Nelson? There you go.
Thank you. I have been a cannabis attorney for almost 31 years, and I want to echo a few of the comments made by some of the speakers today, and also lend my support to the written comments submitted by Origins Council, the Hood Incubator, and CEPEC in the past. Specifically, I want to echo the fact that both urban and rural law enforcement techniques during the current and prior war on drugs included many tactics and terrorization of communities that did not involve record keeping. And perhaps one aspect of getting at the data, while arrest and conviction records are incredibly important, forfeiture actions, and not just the final filing of a forfeiture action, but a forfeiture notice is something that's incredibly important to look at, as well as funding towards law enforcement and what they did with that funding. Additionally, and I do believe that that's applicable to both rural and urban areas, I think that in addition to looking at some of the property information, you may want to refine the data in light of,
30
for
seconds.
example, some of the information that Khalil also testified to, which I support. Excluding properties that did not meet state or local requirements may be helpful in asking the question about how many properties did you look at before you were successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. M. Baril, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you. Since I've kind of gone through the process with the state and how tedious it is with all the questions that they ask and going through the application process, I would ask that when we submit this, if it could be as easy as possible, like click a button here if you own 100%. If you don't, click here real easy so we can go through the process, because everything that we have to submit now is already a headache. And so we want to keep the process like as smooth as possible, because even going through the process is a hindrance to many. Moving forward with things requested, I would like to know or see how it is that equity is verified. So we say war on drugs, aka war on people. Okay, but in social equity, some cities were verifying people as verify social equity based on them being on unemployment. And that's not what the heart of equity in this instance is. It was those who were harmed, whether you lived in the area, arrested, convicted, in some way negatively impacted by this war. Also, thank you to Christine for saying that earlier about what's going on with equity, because that is the type of stance that we get from people that, you all don't need that much money, or you all don't need no money to do what it is that you need to do, when, as you said, we've already paid the price. We've paid for this money. We want what's owed to us so that we could truly move forward. More ask is just how much percentage of the company is owned. If they did any back end deals, like a lot of these big corporations.
Oh, you still got 30 seconds?
Yeah, she dropped off.
Oh, okay.
So can you raise your hand again, please? And we'll move on at this point to Ross Gordon. Wait, hold on. I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm trying to make sure everybody gets their time. So M. Boreal, I'm sending you a request to unmute.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry, you dropped
It's
off.
okay. Yeah, it just all of a sudden it just muted. But just making sure that people aren't doing any back end deals, because as we know, a lot of the big companies can't get into certain cities without having an equity applicant. And we know, Madison and Imani, how different big companies will come and write something on the back, and you think that you have, this equity and you're going to be living good, and come to find out all they're looking to pay you is $60,000 a year, despite them making millions from your entity. So the point here is actually generational wealth, not kind of chains with a different look and feel. So helping equity applicants that way, and then also seeing if they're receiving any type of city funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Ileana Green, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Director of Community Engagement at the Hood Incubator. I want to piggyback both off of Khalil as well as Hannah in terms of the need to collect data in terms of from different geographic regions to see what qualifies folks for social equity status. As Dr. Brown pointed out, the importance of collecting conviction histories, who has conviction histories, but also things such as who was evicted from evicted from housing for zero tolerance policies due to drug convictions, or different measures of being impacted by the war on drugs, and in terms of seeing how those different metrics emerge in urban versus rural spaces. In addition to that, I would also like the idea of collecting financial data for both social equity and general operators, and have it isolated at each part of the supply chain so that we can really see where are issues specific to social equity, are they specific to specific part of the supply chain, and so on and so forth. And then finally, more broadly than this conversation, definitely want to collect data throughout the state to see the impacts of the war on drugs in general as we allocate funding that's resources that are derived from cannabis outside of the licensing scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross Gordon, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hello, committee members. Ross Gordon on behalf of Origins Council. Really appreciate the time today. Hannah Nelson had mentioned earlier, but we did send a letter on March 1st in coalition with the Hood Incubator and Cannabis Equity Policy Council that speaks to a lot of these issues. Just wanted to highlight a couple items included in that letter that I think are relevant to this discussion. First, really want to support the discussion, I think, from a few committee members on the importance, from our perspective, of comparing equity outcomes with non-equity outcomes. So there's that control and so that there's an understanding of the specific issues that are facing equity businesses. Another issue that we mentioned in the letter is that feel like there's some utility to organizing all of that data by both license type and jurisdiction. So you're able to compare both within jurisdictions, how equity and non-equity operators are doing within a certain jurisdiction and within a certain license type, and also between jurisdictions geographically to get a more global sense of how things are working out. And then the final thing, I just wanted to agree with a previous caller who mentioned shelf space. That I think that's a really important aspect of this conversation, particularly if you're talking about brands or producers. That shelf space is such a challenge, and what actually is the composition of what's on the shelves at dispensaries? Does it reflect the diversity of California's cannabis industry, or is it the same types of products, the same brands being on every retail shelf? So I really think that would be helpful information to collect as well, and just really appreciate all the consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Shona, I've sent you a request to unmute. Shona, you are unmuted.
Okay, great. Shona Gokenar, Executive Director of Access to Love SF and also co-founder of SF Black and Brown Just Policies and Allies. I would like some data collected towards legacy equity, not just entrepreneurial, but community organizations that are struggling to get spaces back on the map for our communities to meet, and looking at a little bit of how local control created some local corruption. Today I'm trying to remain calm, but I'm having issues even getting the form to fill out for equity due to, local corruption, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one. We also in San Francisco had several what would be considered today equity businesses that were taken off the map due to struggling with Prop 64 and et cetera. And I think getting some data collected on legacy equity in the cities whose maps were really dismantled, and really getting some input from people that have been in the cannabis space for over 20 years and are struggling to qualify for equity because of some of the things that other people have brought up about conviction versus arrest, housing issues with having an arrest, etc. And I really want to appreciate what Member De La Rosa said about we've already paid for this with our sweat and our blood, my organization in particular, and to...
Thank you very much. Yvette, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. First, I'd like to start with Ms. De La Rosa. She asked a question earlier about, has it been successful? And I can say absolutely not. As an attorney in the cannabis space, I have just seen too many games being played with folks. So no, it's far from being successful. And second, on data capture, the Department of Justice captures and reports racial data all the time. Data is there. If you were arrested and fingerprinted, your information is in the Department of Justice database. So that information is there. And they use the racial data when it's convenient for money or getting tools or toys that they use. And it's not been challenged. I keep hearing the argument about Prop 209 and challenging race-based language, et cetera, et cetera. But the question becomes, why is it good for some to use it when it's convenient and not use it with other things? When you look at Senate Bill 1294, which was the Cannabis Equity Act 2018, very, very specific on the war on drugs and who that data was designed to identify as social equity. That was Black and brown communities. All communities have been harmed in some way by the war on drugs, but you
30
had
seconds.
Black and brown communities that were disproportionately impacted. And you must include that, not just, oh, we were part of the war on drugs, but were you disproportionately impacted? And lastly, I would like to know, why are there no real-time answers from this committee? Back to you.
Thank you. All right, last call for comment on agenda item number 3. Tamika Boyce, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Hi there. Yes. In terms of the data collection, I think some of the stuff that we really need to look at, going back to the real estate, being that real estate is one of the most important and one of the most costly in the application program application process, especially for social equity. But looking at how many have fallen victim to predatory leases and how that has resulted in equity applicants actually falling out of the application process, how much grant funding was provided to operators or applicants who could not continue to operate or even make it to licensing. Also, how many equity operators and or applicants own the properties versus leasing, creating true ownership and true equity. And also how the drug convictions have impacted and contributed to the current homelessness emergency, and specifically in LA and Southern California, with so many who have been excluded from housing and low-income housing benefits and assistance due to drug convictions.
Thank you. Raina Jackson, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Yes, I kind of want to second that in terms um, of premises space. That is really a problem. There's a lack of guidance locally and on the state level. Sometimes you can run it by somebody to, I'm thinking of leasing here, and they'll tell you, oh, okay, you make sure you have 24-hour access and so on. But then it's a disclaimer. It's like, okay, well, that sounds like that'll be okay. But then you sign the lease, and then later it's found that it's not compliant, you know. And I know a lot of this happened earlier on when they weren't as clear about certain things, but that's a problem. And then also locally, especially like San Francisco and any jurisdiction that received money, that was an option that they could have taken to help a little bit with real estate, even if it's just form letters to landlords saying, can you participate in this, and this is legit, and so on, because at first you get they hung up in your face practically until COVID, then they're a little bit more, open. And so basically I rented a space for several years for like at least like 3 years, and found that it wasn't compliant, like several different spaces. And I basically just got reimbursed for paying rent, and that's it. And then now my application's not any good, and I started over again in Oakland. So I'm just giving you an example of where, yeah, there's not enough being done.
30 seconds.
It's just not enough. There has to be some kind of work on the real estate side. You can't just throw us out there and say, you have a chance to do all these things without any kind of support or communication with owners of these types of spaces in the green zones.
Great, thank you. All right, last call for public comment on agenda item number 3. Chair Shockley, there are no more comments on agenda item number 3. Would you like to close public comment?
Yep. Let's close public comment. And with that, let's open the floor back to the members to propose any recommendation for a motion related to this. I'd like to put forward a motion. I'm going to need a little bit of help crafting it here, but I think I have kind of an outline. But the intention here, I think, is to add specifics to last meeting's motion, which was to put forward a recommendation that the DCC do a social equity assessment. And today we had a discussion that I think mostly encompassed a discussion about what social equity businesses or licensees in the state compared to general licensees, data around that. What I'm noticing, especially after hearing public comment, is we didn't really have a robust conversation today about the qualifications to become social equity in the first place. So I just want to make that distinction, and I think we should continue that discussion in our next meeting specifically, and have an agenda around that. But in regards to the part of an assessment that would be related to social equity licensees, I'd like to put forward a motion about that. So I'll start it by saying, let's see, assessing. I'd like to make a motion that the DCC collect data about all owners of cannabis licenses, and some of the specific data points that should be collected about owners, with owners defined as 10% or more equity stakes, is the race and ethnicity, veteran status, gender identity, education, personal savings and resources used, crime impacts, if they have suffered the effect of criminal activity, violence, or break-ins, arrest and convictions, conviction rates, if you're an owner and or an immediate family member convicted for cannabis-related crimes. How much did you have to spend to raise capital, or what did you have to give up to raise the capital that you did? And how difficult was it to find compliant real estate? And how many properties did you pursue before successfully securing one? And this is not specifically about owners, but I think I want to add a recommendation to assess the percentage of shelf space in the industry that is devoted to social equity brands. So these are suggestions that the committee has already made, and also some that have come from the public comment right now. If there's any that are missing from that, please let me know, committee. But that's the gist of the motion that I'd like to put forward for now.
I second that. And I think you encapsulated the data points that we were discussing, as well as some from the general public section of this meeting.
Thank you, Dr. B. So I have a second.
Chair Shockley,
Yes.
why don't I read it back? We were
Please.
taking.
Yep. Let's work on the actual language now.
Yeah, so let's DCC shall collect data about all owners of cannabis licenses with 10% or more equity, including race, ethnicity, veteran status, gender identity, personal savings and resources used, crime impacts, arrests and convictions, conviction rates, owner or immediate family member. How did you raise capital? How difficult was it to find compliant real estate? How many properties did you pursue before securing one? And assess the percentage of shelf space devoted to social equity brands.
So education was left off of there, add education in there. And then on the one where you have how did you raise capital, let's make it more specific to how much equity did you give up in exchange for the capital that you raised?
Got it.
And other than that, I think it's spot on.
Me too.
And then there was.
Would you like us to reread that?
Yes, and I just want to add though that there was the second piece of it that's not related to collecting data on owners, but assessing the shelf space in the industry devoted to social equity brands. So maybe that's a second part or a second recommendation altogether, or a second motion altogether. What do you think in terms of structuring that?
We're adding it right now, so just give us a moment. And then once I read this back, we'll need a second on this. So we'll need a re-up the second on this motion, okay?
Understood.
But hold on one moment. Shannon's typing as fast as she can. Ready? Okay. All right. So I'm about to read it back. DCC should collect data about owners of cannabis licenses with 10% or more interest, including race, ethnicity, veteran status, gender identity, personal savings and resource used, crime impacts, arrests and convictions, education level, conviction rates of owner or immediate family member. How did you raise capital and how much equity did you give up? How difficult was it to find compliant real estate? How many properties did you pursue before securing one? And assessing the percentage of shelf space devoted to social equity brands. Did we capture that social equity part at the end?
Can you say that last part again?
Assessing the percentage of shelf space devoted to social equity brands.
I think let's add to that and make it a separate sentence and say the DCC shall also assess the percentage of shelf space devoted to social equity brands.
Okay, we've made that change.
Okay, now you got to read it again.
Well, Shannon's typing still, excuse me.
Yeah, okay. I think that's the only change though.
Chair Shockley, we're going to make that two motions, okay?
Sure, that makes sense to me.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
So then,
Nope.
so that's no.
We'll just said that it's one motion. So, all right. So I'm going to read it back one last time.
All right.
DCC should collect data about all owners of cannabis licenses, 10% or more interest, including race, ethnicity, vet status, gender identity, personal savings and resources used, crime impacts, arrests and convictions, education level, conviction rates, owner or immediate family member. How did you raise capital and how much equity did you give up? How difficult was it to find compliant real estate and how many properties did you pursue before securing one? The DCC shall also assess shelf space devoted to equity brands.
Wonderful. That's it.
I need a second on that.
I second Dr. Brown.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you for the second, Dr. Brown. Um, with that, can we call a vote?
All right. Sarah Payan,
Aye.
Christine De La Rosa, Member De La Rosa, all right. Dr. Brown
Aye.
and Chair Shockley.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes.
All right, great. With that, I think at this point we should take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back to our next agenda item, the final, well, no, there's two more agenda items. One, a discussion about the social equity definition, and then the other will be recommendations for future agenda items for our next meeting, and then we'll wrap up. So let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back and finish the meeting.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Chair Shockley, let's see if we have Member De La Rosa, Member Brown, Member Pan.
I'm here.
I'm here.
I'm here.
All right.
Excellent. Looks like we have a quorum.
Wonderful. All right, we'll get the meeting back started here. So moving on to item number 4, discussing the state law definition of equity. We again have several questions to consider under this agenda item, and I'd like to pose them one at a time to the committee members for discussion, and then we'll go to public comment. So first, committee, how does the subcommittee view and define equity in the context of cannabis businesses, individuals, and licenses? How do we define equity in the context of businesses, individuals, and licenses? I can start with just saying what I understand the framework to be generally. The definition is how you qualify for being considered a social equity applicant, which varies in different places, but at the state level, I believe it's somebody who has at least 50% ownership in a license that also meets the other criteria of uh, meeting a low income standard, as well as having a uh, cannabis arrest or conviction. Um, and then in different cities, it varies, but it's a similar variation of that often.
Also living in a disproportionately impacted area.
And living in a disproportionately impacted area. And thank you for adding that because that's important. And when it comes to the state, I understand that that's the factor that the DCC actually regulates is what is the disproportionately impacted area aspect of that definition, right? So some of this definition at the state level is baked in through legislation, but the part of it that the DCC gets to basically interpret is the part of the definition that says and disproportionately impacted community. Just for reference. So is that and then we can actually, I think we can include the next question here as part of the same discussion. In what ways does the current definition of equity applicants and licensees correctly capture applicants and licensees affected by the war on drugs? And what gaps exist in the current definition? So what is equity, and is it how is that captured accurately in the current definition, and what are the gaps uh, in what it currently is that could better encompass how we define that equity? So I open the floor to the members to offer any thoughts on the definition.
Well, I don't have any problems with, an arrest or conviction, low income, and arrest or conviction, low income, 50%, owning 50% or more of a business, having 50 or 51% ownership in a business.
Uh-huh. Do you think one is better, 50 or 51?
I think 51%.
Uh-huh. I agree with that as well. I think starting from the 51% of ownership um,
It just gives the
is a
applicant,
better standard.
yeah, it
Yeah.
gives more leverage or
Yeah.
leverage.
Yep. Yep. And most of the jurisdictions I know of, if I'm not mistaken, are 51 at the local level. Uh, but the state is 50. Uh, I don't necessarily like the inconsistency that that offers. Uh, and that leaves the door open for locals doing 50 instead of 51 if they want to as well, I think. Um, I would like to see the definition be 51% instead of the current 50%.
This is Sarah Pyan. I agree with that. I think 51%. I think we should have consistency between state and local policy around that because there's already enough confusion for people navigating the system.
I'd be
I was gonna say that if we're defining social equity, again, I have such a difficult time with the terminology and how it's used in the definition because I feel like we identify but we don't tie any dollars to it. So I feel like there needs to be something in the definition of social equity around dollars that are earmarked directly for social equity at the state level. So if you are going to own 51% of the company, what does that matter if you can't raise any capital to actually start your 51% business that you own? So there should be part of the definition. The definition is it you were arrested, harmed by the war on drugs, lived in an area. If those things are true, then that's social equity. And also those are very limiting because I know as a legacy operator previously, legacy operators need to be, especially legacy cultivators, need to be included in the definition and identified as such, right? I think that that's a big thing. And then tie dollars in that definition. If you follow and you're part of this definition, it's not that you just get a license, because what we've learned in the last 5 years is that the license doesn't really matter if you can't open up your business. And so being able to tie the social equity definition specifically to dollars. And at this point where we are in the history of California, everything we suggest as a committee, both as the DEI committee and then also the social equity committee and the larger committee, should be tied to dollars.
Mhm. Totally agree. Totally agree. And do you have a recommendation how we can do that in the definition?
I do think that we can do that by saying all the current things are true. Let's add in legacy owners as part of that, and we would need to figure out the definition of legacy. I understand that, and I don't know that we have that kind of time on this call. And then to say in the definition, people who fall in this definition are in a specialized group that has access to capital provided by the state. And we're going to get that money that's provided by the state out of the taxes that everybody is paying for that really should have been at the very least 51% earmarked for business owners who are qualified social equity applicants. And we couldn't do that when we originally did this because we didn't really have taxes yet, but now we're 5 years in and we got lots of taxes.
Yep.
And so we should be able to do that. And, you know, it's very interesting to me. People think like, oh, millions and millions of dollars. Yes, millions and millions of dollars is your glass house, millions and millions on a parent company, but you don't have access, you don't have trouble accessing capital, right? So the second thing that's super important is that it doesn't take that much money, not that much. It doesn't take the money that we're seeing in these big like M&A things to actually start your business, especially if you're a small business, but it does require some capital, especially as we talked about in the previous before the break around real estate. But being able to tie that to dollars in the definition, I think would be very powerful in showing a shift from just talking about it to moving to being about it.
So essentially saying like equity businesses are businesses that are entitled to uh, subsidies, essentially. Businesses that are excited are eligible for access to capital.
That they are not able, because this particular subset of people is mostly women, Black people, brown people, people of color, people who've been formerly incarcerated, who have a record. They do not have access to the normal ways in which to access capital. So we have to, as a state, provide that. And we're not asking for the state to carve out any of their existing budget. We're asking them to carve it out of the cannabis tax budget, which should have been done from the beginning, but hasn't so far. And also, it needs to be specific to the individuals, as Jillian has told us in all of our calls. Giving it to the cities does not translate to the people who need it the most getting it. And so that's why it's important. People are like, oh my gosh, that's going to be a lot, trouble and of time. But the state is relying on the people that get the Ghost Biz money to manage that money. I don't think that it's any different for them to manage being able to give those non-recoverable grants, low interest loans, zero interest loans. We've seen this done in Oregon. Portland has a thing where you can get a zero interest loan. That doesn't put harsh, expectations on the people who are getting the loans for the money. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do it.
Sorry to interrupt here, Member De La Rosa. I don't want to interrupt because I know you're putting forth a lot of really great information, but we are straying pretty far away from the agenda topic with the discussions of capital and access to capital. So if we could tie it more to the definition of equity, that would stay on topic.
Okay, I think we should tie access to capital to the definition of equity.
Yeah. So equity are I'll just kind of paraphrase it here. Equity is defined as businesses eligible for special access to capital, specifically
Special access to government capital.
to government capital.
State government capital. Let me make that clear, because people will be like, oh, this
State
city's
government.
doing that city's doing that. No, very
Yeah.
specific to that. Because if it's in the definition, there's an expectation that we would get it. Right now, the
I agree with-
definition
I agree with
doesn't,
that. Doesn't
it's
imply
really,
any
nothing.
benefits.
No benefits for being identified as a social equity applicant or a social equity business owner.
I agree with that. So we're saying the subcommittee views the definition of equity as businesses designated as eligible for access to state government capital.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Let's make it specific. State,
Mhm.
California state cannabis tax set aside as capital access for the social equity applicants.
Got it.
Mhm.
Got it. And we'll come back to this after we open it up to public comment, if we want to make a motion, and we can get more specific in the language there, which I think that would be a good idea to put forward a motion about that. Let's see. And also we're discussing in what ways does the current definition work good? And then the final question is, what revisions does the subcommittee recommend be considered for the portions of the equity definition established by DCC through regulation, and why? Other thoughts on that? The portions of the equity definition established by DCC through regulation. And that's kind of what I was talking about a little earlier about the portion of the definition that is interpreted from the legislation by the DCC, which is the disproportionately impacted areas. And so I believe the DCC has a standard of, what is it, 25% of the local median income. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the current uh, standard that the DCC is using to regulate what area is considered disproportionately impacted. And so the question is asking, uh, what revisions would the subcommittee recommend to that specific part of the definition? Like, is 25% the right level, uh, sh- or should that be expanded? Is that the right way to come up with uh, a disproportionately impacted area? Are there other suggestions of how that should be even assessed in the first place?
Well, I know different jurisdictions have looked at that differently. In Los Angeles, we looked at police reporting districts as, to determine, disproportionately impacted areas, right?
Mhm.
That's interesting how the state is going to do that. How does the state determine disproportionately impacted areas? What's their criteria? I'm not clear about that.
Yeah, yeah, and
Chair Shockley, I can jump in. This is
I
Eugene.
was gonna
Be
ask
helpful.
if
Yeah,
somebody,
for sure.
yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Please,
So,
Eugene. Yeah.
just to clarify, for disproportionately impacted area, for benefits associated with state eligibility, the current definition allows for census tracts that are in the top 25% for unemployment and poverty in the state of California. So right now we have a map in which individuals can essentially plug in an address and determine if their address is eligible to participate based on that. So that's the current definition. It also includes eligibility for immediate family members who are arrested or convicted for a cannabis related crime. So that's the kind of disproportionately impacted neighborhood portion of eligibility. So there's area median income, which is 60%. That's one way to qualify for income. The second and third ways you can qualify is either being arrested or convicted for a cannabis related crime. And then the fourth, as Chair Shockley was mentioning, is really connected to disproportionately impacted community, which currently is 25%, being in the top 25% for both unemployment and poverty in the state of California.
Thank you, Dr. Hilsman.
You're welcome.
So any thoughts about if that's the right way to capture it, or other ways that it could be captured?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but for the state, you have to have two of the three definite criteria or one of the three.
Just one.
I was saying.
Excuse me, Dr. Hilsman, you said one?
Sure. Eugene Hilsman, yeah, it's just one to be eligible at the state level.
And that's really interesting because, I'm concerned that, like I can only speak to my experience in Los Angeles. You have to have two of the three: disproportionately impacted area, low income, and arrest or conviction, two of the three. And yeah.
Because under this definition, you could only have the 60%, under 60% income and qualify.
That is correct.
Uh-huh.
See, I have a problem with that because I don't think that's the spirit of Prop 64 and the breadth and scope of it. I mean, you just have to be low income. That doesn't mean that you were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. You just, that's what did the most damage to Black and brown communities was the devastation of the war on drugs.
That's right. I agree with that. I agree that in the concept of having a combination of them, not just one of those. If it was just one, maybe the conviction would be the one, but not just the low income. But I think the combination of the conviction and the low income is evidence of the conviction has held you back, right? Um,
That is the criteria for LA. You have to have arrest or conviction and then one of the other two. I don't know if I was clear about that. You have to have two of the three, but you have to have arrest or conviction and then one or the other, either low income or
disproportionately impacted
disproportionately
area.
impacted. Yes, but arrest or conviction is the without that you don't qualify. Period.
And just to confirm, Chair Shockley, that would require legislative action.
Got it. Because we're just thank you for that distinction, Eugene. Because we're discussing the regulatory part of the DCC, but all this is relevant to each other. So some of the discussion will be about things that will need to be changed through legislation. But in this case, yeah, this is one of those. So yeah, so connecting, changing it to where you'd have to have multiple is something that would have to happen through legislation. But the distinction of disproportionately impacted area is the part that DCC has discretion over. Yes, and so right now it's 25%. The bottom 25% of unemployment and income
In poverty,
and
right?
poverty.
Yeah. So that the word "and" there is like taking all of the 25%, the top 25% of unemployment, taking all the top 25% in poverty, and then combining them to come up with a list of folks who are in both the top 25 for both of those categories.
Got it. And that's the current part that DCC regulates. And how is that decided on? How and why? What are the parameters around like what the DCC can base it on, basically?
Sure. So I think that like when the regulations were being considered, there were emergency regulations that were developed by the Department of Cannabis Control, primarily because I believe the legislation passed in late 2021, September. And then there was a requirement that the Department of Cannabis Control was required to begin issuing fee waivers by January 1st of the next year, right? And so there was already a state definition for communities that were disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition, essentially. That was a part of the distribution of financial support through California Community Reinvestment Grants, which are funds dedicated to local nonprofits and public health departments. So there was already essentially an analysis that included a number of criteria for communities to participate. And that it essentially included, I believe, 5 markers for eligibility, including living in one of the eligible counties. It included being in an opportunity zone. It included some educational metrics, and it included this top 25% unemployment and poverty. And so that was the first version of the regulations that were instituted that included all of those categories.
Yeah.
Right, as way of being eligible for being disproportionately impacted. Then we went through the formal regulatory process, actually another round of emergency regulations, which narrowed that criteria, in which the five kind of areas that I just mentioned were essentially narrowed just to that one criterion after conversation and engagement with the legislature that believed that eligibility was too broad.
Yeah. And it was believed that it was too broad, essentially based on how the funds were being distributed and to what communities, the outcome of that, what communities the funds were distributed to.
That's right.
And feedback from the community about that, and that creating the need for it to be more narrow. Thank you for that background on how it was narrowed from those five parameters down to the one, because the five was viewed as too broad. And so I guess the question is, how does the subcommittee feel about where it is currently? Is it too narrow? Is it still too broad? Or is it where it should be? And what we would change to make it what we think it should be. So I think that's the final question of this agenda item, committee. How do we feel about that?
I had a question for Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, in your area, for people who had arrests or convictions to qualify, was it the individual that had to have it, or could it be an immediate family member as well?
It could be an immediate family member as well.
Okay, thank you. Chair Shockley, the only thing that comes to mind right now is what we were talking about previously, changing the percentage of ownership to from 50% to 51%, to make it more equitable and to really make sure that the social equity applicant has control of their business.
Okay. Thank you for that. If there's no more recommendations, I think we should open it up for public comment. I'm sure the public has been listening intently to this and has some input. Yeah, if that's all right with the other members, let's go ahead and open it up for public comment.
Alrighty, we can do that. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name. If you've logged onto the meeting by pressing *3 if you've called in. You'll have 2 minutes to speak at a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you'll be muted and we will move on to the next request. You have one opportunity to speak on each agenda item, so let's get started and kick off with 6 asterisks. I have sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, this is Paul Hansberry, Lovingly and Legally. I happen to be in a general partnership with my partner. There are 2 people in our corporation. We're a small general partnership. We each are equal. We have 50% ownership in both. And so I would have to, if you change the recommendation to 51%, I would not become eligible anymore because I only own 50% and not an equal share with my partner. So I would strongly, if I have to, I will reapply. I will cancel this partnership and change it just for the sake of eligibility. But I think should be a consideration that a 50-50 split with when there are just 2 partners, to be fair to both and so that they were equal partners. I wish you would consider that before you submit your recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anthony Avalos, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again. My name is Anthony Avalos, co-founder of the Council of Equity Advocacy, San Diego. And so what we want to do is hopefully make your jobs a little bit easier. We think that I'd like to submit the following definition for cannabis social equity. Cannabis social equity is the establishment of a statutory, regulatory, and compensatory framework that is centered around repairing and empowering communities and individuals that were most harmed by the government's active participation in the war on drugs, while also providing resources and meaningful opportunities for those communities and individuals to participate and succeed in the cannabis market. The formation of public policies regarding cannabis must, from their inception, be based on the goals of cannabis social equity and also promote principles of fairness, justice, and equity. To add to that definition, we need a definition for a social equity beneficiary, anyone who is not seeking a cannabis license, identified as disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs. We also need a definition for social equity applicant business. You guys have that already covered. And also a social equity provider, any provider identified as supporting social equity programming. Lastly, we are concerned at the CEASD about income requirements being closely tied to benefits. Thank you so much. We're concerned about income requirements as they're not closely tied to war on drug harm. Now, with that being said, we do believe that every municipality should complete an appropriate and historically accurate equity assessment to identify the extent of harm by the war on drugs. Then we can use that data to properly identify disproportionately impacted groups for social equity purposes.
Thank you. Call-in user number 13. I've sent you a request to unmute. Call-in user number 13. There you go.
This is Mariel Burrell, also known as May Burrell. As he mentioned earlier, and I'm thankful that he went into the definition of cannabis social equity, because to hear about, well, if you only made this amount of money per year, or if you lived in this area way out here in the middle of Redondo Beach somewhere and you were nowhere near an area where police and enforcement specifically targeted us like we were animals, oh, you get to qualify for social equity, you get to get hundreds of thousands of dollars, you get to get all these perks. But then that defeats the part of social equity. Social equity is for those who were negatively impacted by the war on drugs. You can use LA. If you lived in Watts, if you lived in South Central, if you were in Long Beach, if you were arrested, if you were convicted, you were negatively impacted, and so was your family. Not someone who was on unemployment during COVID. That's not social equity. So may we clearly define what social equity is so that the social equity money that's available can go to those who need it and not be spread so thin that the ones that are actually in the game now and have decided to go toward the city. And you know what? As God said, 70 times 7, we forgive you for hunting us like animals. We forgive you for targeting us. We forgive you for taking away our husbands and our dads and our family members and for breaking up our family. And now we're going to blindly go in and trust you to get into this industry. That takes a lot. So those who are actually in the process, who are social equity, they need all the help. And those who aren't, go ahead and get in the industry, but don't come under the social equity badge. Don't come under the social equity umbrella, because that's not you.
Thank you. Cassandra Taliaferro, I've sent you a request to unmute.
My name is Cassandra Taliaferro, and I am a legacy second-generation farmer who grew up in Southern Humboldt. Southern Humboldt was removed from a local qualifying neighborhood, and I was told that it was because of the poverty census tract. And to clarify, that poverty census tract is for the years of 2013 to 2017. And that is during the green rush. That was the big cannabis bubble. Now with the market crash, Garberville is a ghost town. Farms are closing. So if you had to have, to qualify, you had to have lived here for a time frame between 1980 and 2016. And why would you assess the poverty census tract for the green rush. It doesn't make much sense. And to require the arrest record for oneself or relative is not an accurate portrayal of how Southern Humboldt was targeted by camp. And my father is an unsolved homicide. There was no arrest. It's still an unsolved mystery. I've been held at gunpoint at age 12 while a neighboring property was raided. There was no arrest. I have a lifetime of harassment by, strategic government. Anyways, I appreciate this, but yes, I agree with the previous caller. Social equity, you shouldn't have to still be poor to qualify. And please put Southern Humboldt back in the local qualifying neighborhood.
Thank you. Drakari Donaldson, I've sent you a request to unmute.
My name is Jakari Donaldson. I'm the CEO and verified equity applicant of the California Street Cannabis Company in San Francisco. And I currently own and operate 2 locations in the city. And I would just like to request that we reconsider or open the state's definition of equity. I, like many other equity applicants in San Francisco, own 40% of my company, and I'm experiencing the same troubles and issues as the rest of the cannabis industry, including equity operators in the industry. However, because I don't meet the 50% equity ownership requirement by the state, I do not qualify for a number of financial support options, such as the equity fee waiver and the CDTFA excise tax credit. I am the true CEO of my company. I am personally guaranteed on all the leases. I pay all the bills. Staff report directly to me. Yet to be told my business isn't equity enough to qualify for the benefits of being equity in the eyes of the state, it's just not right. It is unfair that operators like me are going to keep being excluded from receiving equity support from the state because of a 10% difference in ownership requirement. San Francisco equity operators should not be siloed from the rest of the state. We all know this industry is tough, and it's that much harder when you're competing in a market where the population size is decreasing, competition from the legal and black market is increasing, and burglary and robbery crimes are skyrocketing with no end in sight. We all need all the help that we can get.
30 seconds.
So I just hope that we can figure out some way to reconsider and include San Francisco equity in the state's definition.
Thank you. Ileana Green, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, this is Ileana from the Hood Incubator. I wanted to speak on the state's definition of being from an area that's disproportionately impacted by past criminal justice policies. That's one of the criteria that will allow you to qualify, along with that in conjunction with being from the top 25% for national employment, poverty, or having the conviction. So the state defines these disproportionately impacted areas as places that had higher counties that had higher drug arrests than the rest of the state. I think that definition should be more narrowly tailored. When a county is a very large space, but also to account, I think that a method similar to how Los Angeles used in terms of finding key points of criteria of impacts of the war on drugs, where those are on the map, and then overlap those different criteria. So for example, of course, conviction rates would be disproportionate conviction rates, but then also in terms of folks who are evicted from housing for zero drug tolerance policies. And other markers, I think that should be done for both urban and rural spaces. I'm not sure of the markers, and I'm sure some of my peers from rural spaces can talk to the markers that should be used for those spaces. But I think that this is something that should be done throughout the state in terms of seeing what are the impacts of the war on drugs, those markers, and then have a Venn diagram of kind of where those places overlay, and the hottest spots would be the places that we consider disproportionately impacted. So that's much more intensive than just a county that has a higher arrest rate than the rest of the county. So thank you for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Jillian, I've sent you a request to unmute.
First of all, I want to say, I agree with committee member Christine De La Rosa. What is the use in being the first to open a cannabis testing lab and a woman in the city of Long Beach when I can't actually open for business, right? So equity needs to equal funding as needed. I want to suggest that maybe this committee can be of some help to local cities and say, hey, we have gotten this, information from this entrepreneur and they need to move forward. We suggest that you help them in moving forward because, like she said, we're just talking. We need solutions. We need help. At the end of the day, I understand what you're saying about qualifications, but we have to go through that with the local level to be able to qualify to be social equity. So going through this again, I'm like, I still need to open. I'm paying rent. The landlord got a year free rent last year. I'm in a 5-year lease. I need help to open my business. So let's just get to the point where we have some action going. That's what we need. Immediate help, someone to talk to the local cities and guide them because obviously they don't know what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross Gordon, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you, committee members. Ross Gordon with Origins Council, representing legacy operators primarily in rural cannabis producing regions of California. Want to just reiterate again the March 1st letter that we sent in coalition with the Hood Incubator and Cannabis Equity Policy Council, which speaks to a lot of these issues. Really want to agree with Eliana Green's comments earlier from the Hood Incubator. One thing that letter really highlights is the request, which I know your committee has already approved, to do a statewide equity assessment, in part to collect data to inform this conversation about an equity definition, so that we're able to have more comprehensive, more accurate data on which areas were really most impacted in terms of enforcement activities. I know that Eliana mentioned a few metrics which aren't really included in any of the current state definitions, including stop and frisk, traffic stops, and rental housing evictions. In rural areas, some of the metrics that really aren't being recognized currently include raids, detentions, and civil asset forfeitures, which I think a previous commenter spoke to as well. And want to acknowledge that it's a really challenging conversation to come up with a definition that's both inclusive enough to capture folks who really were impacted by the war on drugs, but also narrow enough considering that there are limited resources. And unless, at least until we can increase the amount of resources, the reality is that there's limited resources. So how do you make sure they're going to areas and to folks who are most heavily impacted? And so it's definitely not an easy conversation. The last thing I want to mention, as we move towards an equity definition, hopefully eventually informed by an assessment, is I think there are some challenges with the current definition. A couple people have talked about the challenges with income. One of the challenges, I think, also is the statewide equity definition. The geographic criteria is in many ways also an income criteria because it's based on average income in a geographical area. And thinking about more enforcement-based metrics to be able to look at geography, I think more accurately captures those areas which are most impacted by the war on drugs. Thanks.
Thank you. Attendee Shona, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, Shona again. It's a really challenging conversation, and as a person who never neatly fits in one box or the other, and as a person who's represented poor people at policy tables and received donations from up north and had discussions with the impacts on those families, I come from a middle ground in this discussion, and I think it's really important that there's a available route to have people tell their story and their narrative, and to consider variances and special circumstances where, hey, you might live in this area, but this is your experience. I think there's a need to acknowledge how Black and brown people were hunted down by law enforcement, and that is not exactly the same situation as being terrorized by law enforcement when you have access to other resources. So nothing is the same, but yet we're all people struggling to fit into a definition to rebuild our communities. And I just really see the need for the ability to tell the story and not just check
30
the
seconds.
box. Thank you.
Thank you. Attendee Yvette, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Thank you. I would first like to echo Anthony from San Diego and Ileana Green from the Hood Incubator. The discussion between the commission is even more compelling as to why a statewide definition is necessary, and that it's based on real data that supports the legislative intent for social equity. It seems that we constantly get away from the legislative intent for social equity, and that is based on the war on drugs for communities disproportionately impacted. And they reference who that was, Black and brown people. So it begs the question, how does the DCC have discretion over defining what a disproportionately impacted area is when that is supported by data? It is there. People say, well, it doesn't exist. No, it exists. Law enforcement has that data. So how do you get around using that to identify high crime areas of arrest? You must use police reporting data. Yes, I know some doesn't exist, but for the most part, it is used all the time to generate monies for other programs that are needed. Law enforcement is good at that. So I would ask this committee to do the same thing. Get the data and let's stop going in circles with this. We keep talking the same stuff, but there is a legislative intent
30
that
seconds.
thank you. You need to go back to and really honor the legislative intent for social equity. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, members of the public, last call for agenda item number 4. Ignite Daniel, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Greetings, Ignite again. Thank you so much for hearing me. Unfortunately, after pushing for the police reporting districts, we found that it was not a good help. So I would definitely urge, because it did cut out a lot of people who deserved, for instance, off of 60th and Crenshaw, like one block was red and qualified. However, the block around the corner did not. And so it did cut a lot of people out who should have qualified. So being mindful of that. And also being mindful that the 51% is in place for the people who are subject to the predatory lenders. There are more of us who are out here subject to those who are taking advantage of them. So we do understand that people have partnerships that are 50-50, and maybe there could be some type of accommodation for them. However, the 51% should definitely remain in place for those who are out here having to deal with predatory investors. The income requirement is one of, so keeping that in place as well is something that should definitely be mindful, because that is more of the impact that our people face when it comes to this that is happening. And right, just, we do forgive you. What May said, I do definitely want to echo what May said with the forgiveness and being mindful that, referring to people as still being poor and this, that, and the other, that is one of the things that was disproportionately impacted in our areas. And that is something that we do face still to this day and should not be left out. Give thanks.
Thank you. And Raina Jackson, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Okay. Yes, I think that the definition of equity, we're getting in the right direction, but we still need a tiered approach. There needs to be something granting extra priority status to people who have extensive combinations of this, qualifying criteria. And so this is not meant to exclude or to get, to make Prop 209 kick in or whatever, but meant to prioritize. I mean, that's just real. Prioritize. It's like, it's unfortunate that we have to kind of use these euphemisms. Like basically we're saying, prioritize those disproportionately harmed. Ultimately, I mean, by systemic racism, repackaged and renamed, dressed up as a PR, campaign, war on drugs. And so, that's just real. And we have the data, like Yvette was saying, to just tell the truth. We're not trying to exclude, but we've got to prioritize. Come on, you know? And I also think that having a conviction, that should not be mandatory, um, because there's still other effects. I mean, whether you've been in jail or your family has been in jail, or um, you know, even for San Francisco, they actually made it not. You didn't have to live in San Francisco to qualify, which I thought was really good because
30 seconds.
we are displaced. Displaced by gentrification, a euphemism, basically an embodiment of racism. So we have to be able to tell the truth and just kind of make some kind of priority, and not excluding people, not understanding, it's not just going to be, it's not going to be just Black, brown, and indigenous, but we are the priority. And it's just simple and plain.
Thank you. Attendee Shirley, I've sent you a request to unmute. Shirley? There you go.
The like everybody's basically saying is the statistics don't lie. And so when 80% of all arrests were Black or brown, that's how it should look. Now, the legacy farmer and his problems are basically the same, just in a different way. So we respect the legacy farmer and that percentage. But it should look like it really was 80% on us, and the legacy farmer getting their butts beat up too. So that's how it should kind of look. It doesn't look like that. We know why, but I would hope that the state, I've kind of talked to you all individually, and all of you agree that the states and the city blew it by not having a bond basically available for the social equity applicants, so they wouldn't be attacked by the predators and taken advantage of. And so now, how do you wrong it? How do you make a wrong right? I know it's hard, but the definition is critical in moving forward. So it is what it is. Just follow what it says, and let's figure what that is. But the statistics are what the statistics are. Thank you.
Thank you. Attendee Steve, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
So I was convicted in 2018, sentenced to 3 years state prison, from Clovis, California, in Fresno County. And when I got out, I tried applying for the city of Fresno one, the social equity, and it didn't work. They cut me out pretty quickly. If I go back to other cities I've lived in, they all don't have licenses. And, if I just sell it illegally in San Francisco, I guess I'm still at risk. The only reason is, San Francisco doesn't, I guess, have tough on crime as much. So it's interesting. Sometimes you have to go to the areas that aren't tough on crime, even though you want to live in maybe a nicer city. And, it still doesn't work. There's still no equity for, if you've been convicted, or, let's say you have none of these qualifications, and you're saying, I'm going to have my business. Now I'm going to get convicted again and again and again, possibly. So there's no equity, the way I'm looking at it. And this is recent. And then I'm cut out of the San Francisco one because you have to get convicted before 2016. So I just don't get it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Last call for agenda item number 4. All right.
All right, if that's all the public comment, let's open the floor back to the committee. Now is the time to make a motion on this if we'd like to. My thought is that there are a number of things that I think there is consensus on around a social equity definition or changes there too, like for example, the 51% threshold rather than 50%. But I think there's other things where there's not quite consensus, and we may need more discussion on. My feeling is this is just the beginning of this discussion, and maybe we should continue it to the next committee meeting. And have more debate about it and more input from the public. Because I know just for me, a lot of that input that we just heard, um, you know, added a lot of context and just offered more dimension to it that I'd like to think about more in how we come with an actual motion and recommendation, particularly the language for our definition of social equity. I think we're off to a good start with, attaching the the support aspect that goes along with being designated social equity. But I think there's more we can expound on. Um, so that's just my thoughts. What do you think, committee members?
Um, Chairman Shockley, I think I would like to I'm going to commit to doing some research. I want to look at other jurisdictions around the country because we're not in isolation. It's an ecosystem across this country. And so I'm going to look at other jurisdictions to see what their definition is, the similarities, the differences. Perhaps there's some other best practices that we can incorporate, but I'm going to be prepared to have some other data and some other information and insights for if we continue this on. I would like to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. And I appreciate the commitment to do some more research and bring that back to the committee as well. Any thoughts from the other committee members about a motion now or continuing this topic to later? And the next and final agenda item will be future agenda recommendations, and then we'll wrap up. But any other thoughts?
I just want to say that I think that it would be good to continue the conversation. I really appreciate all of the thoughtful conversation that's happened today. And I think that because we all take this very seriously, that educating ourselves on what's going on in other areas of the country would be invaluable and would serve the people that this is going to impact.
Totally agree. Okay, well, with that, I let's close this agenda item for now and move on to the final agenda item. Let me see. Agenda item number 5, future agenda items. So, at our first subcommittee meeting, we established a list of priorities for subcommittee discussion. Those priorities are a statewide definition of equity, was number 1. Number 2, collection of equity data. Number 3 was provisional licenses for equity applicants, SB 51, which we had some comments about. And number 4 was resources for equity businesses, including access to education and funding. So I just wanted to bring those back up and for context as we take in recommendations for future agenda items, first from the committee, and then we'll open it up for the public to give recommendations as well. So with that, I open the floor for recommendations from the members of the committee.
Well, I'm in agreement with all four of these listed. The first two we're already discussing today, and so we're going to continue on with that. But SB 51 definitely, and resources, access to education, technical assistance, and funding, absolutely. I'm interested in what the other members would like to see moving forward for future agenda items.
And personally, I'm thinking that we'll continue this discussion about the social equity definition into our next subcommittee meeting. So just to say where my head is at, and then the other items on the agenda for that meeting will be, among these four here. So maybe we start getting into SB 51 and the provisional licensing as well in that next meeting. I know that's something that's time sensitive and currently at issue. So I think that's something we want to definitely get on. Regretfully, haven't had it on the agenda as much already, but that's something I think we need to get to.
Chairperson Shafi, if I could add one more for future items, access to state capital.
Okay,
Access to capital at the state level.
wonderful. Yep, access to capital from the state.
Yes.
Chair Shockley, I don't know if it would be relevant as a topic on its own or if it'd be something that would piggyback on it, but somebody had mentioned something earlier today that I thought was very valuable, which is shelf space, equity shelf space.
Yes.
And I'm not quite sure where that would fit in, but I do believe that we should make that part of the conversation as well.
Yes, thank you for that. I think it fits into the resources for equity businesses, including access to education and funding. And maybe not perfectly, but I think it's kind of in that category in terms of equity benefits. So I think we can lump it into that conversation.
That sounds great.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that back up. Okay, well, if there's any more, please don't hesitate to make them now. But if that's it, we'll close it and we'll open it up for public comment.
Excellent. We can do that. All right, I'll say
All
this
right.
one last time. I will say this. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name if you've logged into the meeting, or by pressing *3. You'll have 2 minutes with a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you will be muted and we'll be moving on to the next comment requester. So we're going to kick this off with Anthony Avalos. I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, thanks again for taking my comment. Can we go back to the slide that we were just looking at? I want to make sure that I'm referencing the slide properly.
Actually, we're taking public comment on future agenda items only.
Right. And this is in regards to the last future agenda item that's identified resources for equity businesses, including access to education and funding. I'd like to also have included the identification of social equity beneficiaries and subsequent non-business related benefits. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Call-in user number 13. I've sent you a request to unmute. Colin, there you go. There you go.
Hi, this is Mariel Burrell again. I do want to really stress that overseeing local jurisdictions and allocation of funding and truly helping equity applicants in all capacities. As I stated, you all are CC'd on emails between GoBiz, the City of Long Beach, the mayor, district council members, et cetera, as the funding is truly needed for equity. As Jillian has said, her and I both have neighboring buildings. I mean, we both are going to be the first Black women in our city to erect cannabis facilities, but the city is literally holding their hands behind their back, though they have $2.5 million sitting in the bank for equity right now. I personally have a 10-day notice to my lease and really needing the funds. And I've asked the city, they will not give it, though they know that I'm in the ocean literally drowning, and they have the ability to help. So making sure that we really do press on these local jurisdictions to help those equity applicants that have taken the plunge, and then also kind of taking it a step further and asking the state to allow that funding to go directly toward applicants that have pending state licenses that need help along the process, who do not have equity investors, and who are looking to keep 100% equity of their businesses. That's something that cities and other people are not really talking too much about. We hear a lot about, go get yourself an investor, not, hey, let us help you so that you can be successful. So in the future, if we could add that to the agenda item, because once we do that and we actually get the help that we need, there will be more equity entrepreneurs in the system. Right now, numbers don't lie. We don't have that many social equity operating. So that as a whole shows that we're failing. And we're many years into this industry already, like 5+. So we got to do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Rakija McLeod, I've just sent you a request to unmute. Rakija? Okay, we'll come back. Jillian, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Perfect. I really want to echo what Muriel just said. It's important that we really look at what's going on with local cities, but I have a recommendation. I'd like to recommend for the committee to work with local cities to ensure funding for social equity. When there is a need, if there's a 10-day notice, that should prompt funding for me, where there's a notice from the state saying, Jillian, by July 8th, if you don't provide your update on your architectural plans, your license, your application will be null and void. We've come so far. So we need that additional step to move forward, access to capital from the state. That's important. Can we get that on the agenda, please? Because listen, if the cities are sitting here, the city of Long Beach has a $600 million reserve. Think about what the interest rates they're getting on that money. And if Cannabis Oversight has 2-point-something million in their account, what is 10,000 to that amount is not going to hurt them. So with this committee forming and saying, look, we have the architectural invoice, we have the 10-day notice, please fund this applicant. We need your support. We can't keep talking. I'm tired of talking. I'm down at City Hall Tuesday sitting for 4 hours. 4 hours and 30 minutes to talk for 3 minutes. Go on YouTube, but go check us out. Long Beach Social Equity Entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you. Rakija McLeod, I've sent you a request to unmute. Rakija McLeod. I just sent you another request to unmute. Okay, we're going to move on. Yvette, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I would ask this committee to stop adding to the agenda and address the issues that have already been placed on the agenda and discussed at length, to give us some updates on what has happened. Has the DCC been engaged with? Has there been a response from the DCC? What action items do we have in place? Because the more you continue to add to the agenda, it dilutes what the priorities have been in the first place. So again, committee, please stop adding more to the agenda, and let's get some of this stuff resolved that we're here for. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Rakesha McLeod, we'll try again here. All right, we're going to go to attendee Shona. Just sent your request to unmute. There you go.
Hi, I heard a couple things from members that I don't know if it's a additional agenda item, but maybe tucked within some of the agenda items. But the first I heard from member Della Rosa about really pairing the concepts of equity with the funding that's needed, so that it's not this continual conversation going on and on. And I know I feel for people saying, hey, I've been up at City Hall. I was up at San Francisco City Hall for 25 years and still going and still talking. And it's a lot of talk goes on, and getting the action done is difficult. So I feel that. But I think we need to better defining underneath the agenda items often makes the discussion move quicker. So that's why I'm emphasizing these. I also heard member Pan talk about shelf space. So way back in the day in 2002, 2003, I was helping operate a space during Operation Pipe Dreams on Haight Street. And one of the things I did, being the female partner, which was rare in those days, is I had a day specifically where I showed off the shelf space of women, of people of color. And that day ended up being one of the most populated days where people were coming in and going, yeah, I want to support this. I want to purchase from what became equity, certified products and et cetera. So those two things seem important to me. And also, I'm going to go back to let's hear a little bit more about legacy equity and what can we do to get some of the legacy equity back on the map. Thank you.
Thank you. Cassandra Taliaferro, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hello. I would like the subcommittee to consider partnering with other state agencies to waive other fees for qualified applicants. The reality is that the DCC license fee is just a drop in the bucket for how expensive it is to run a cannabis business. And one thing that Humboldt County did, which is super amazing, is that equity recipients receive other benefits offered by the county for in-house services, such as permit fee waivers for planning and building. You get your scale certification through the ag department paid for. And the one awesome, super great thing is that they work with the local credit union to waive your monthly banking fees for your cannabis business account. And all that stuff really adds up. And I just thought it was a great partnership. So if the state could work with, say, like the State Water Board or CDFW, we pay annual fees that seem to be increasing every year for renewing water rights, filing for irrigation permits, and monitoring and reporting programs. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Ignite Daniel, I've sent you a request to unmute.
That funding should remain on the table. We should definitely be discussing funding and seeing how to help social equity applicants not be at the disposal of predators. And speaking of funding, I think you guys should address what happened with the many verified social equity applicants who were unable to set up elevated accounts to even apply for the seed grant. I attempted to set up a number of people's accounts and was told that they were not verified applicants when they were indeed verified social equity applicants. On their Excel, it showed tier 1 and tier 2 verifications from the first round as well as the last round being verified, and they were unable to set up the they weren't even able to get into the system to even apply to give the information needed in order to get the funding that was there for them. So something should definitely be addressed in regards to that by this committee, and how that could even happen with people who are verified in the system, and your ACA number that you have to input should be connected to that being verified. And there's no way that people should have been denied access to setting up an account. Give thanks.
Thank you. Raina Jackson, I've sent you a request to unmute. Raina? Oh. One more time, Raina. There
Okay,
you go.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think one of the resources that should go to equity applicants and operators is, I mean, definitely for applicants, priority in processing their applications, and some kind of expediter or someone to kind of walk them through and to help it move, because that, hasn't been happening, and people are bleeding out, money paying rent, waiting, and they keep getting told, oh, you'll get it, you're going to get your local permit in maybe 2 months or whatever. But yeah, so I mean, I think the state needs to take control of that a little bit more, and not have that, so much of this on these local jurisdictions. There needs to be oversight over the grant money that they collect and sit on for, a year or so or whatever. And then when it's time to apply, like I don't know, my experience, maybe some people didn't have that experience, but they basically acted like if they withheld the money, like they got to keep it themselves, like just waiting to swat you down, email trails that go back and forth, nothing gets resolved, just a whole like game. So there needs to be some oversight over them, because they are not, it's not working. So that's one of the resources that we need. We need it to be expedited and prioritized, and they're supposed to help remove some of those local layers and obstacles. That's part of what they got money for, to actually do, and they're not doing it enough. It just this has to there has to be a handle over it and some kind of oversight. We can't just say, oh, this is what happened, okay? Because that's what's been happening so far. There's nobody who's in charge, I guess, to really say, you guys can't do this, to San Francisco Office of Cannabis, or that other place where the woman is waiting, to get her license.
Rakija McLeod, sent you a request to unmute. There you go. Hello?
Yes, I don't have a comment right now. I didn't raise my hand or anything.
Oh, pardon me. It was raised on my screen. I apologize. Thank you. Shirley, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Okay, thank you. I really think it's important. I appreciate everything that everybody's doing, but it is critical for us to get this right. So the cities that are in need of you guys have to see what they need and make sure they are supported and are successful. Our success rate is critical. And just like somebody's saying, I don't know how many social equity operators are open right now, but it's a really slow process. And the clock is ticking. And 2026 is going to be here in a second. And I don't know what the rate of social equity businesses getting up per year, per month, but it's slow. And they have to find a way to help them get up and going. This has to be a success. This is an experiment. It is critical for you guys to get it right. So find out exactly what they need in Fresno, what they need in Bakersfield. Get them the funds. It's different. What they need in Long Beach, what they need in LA, what they need in but you guys are critical in making sure that all of those businesses in all of those areas are successful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Yvette, I've just sent you a request to unmute. Yvette?
Hi, I've already commented.
Yeah,
Oh,
so I
Unless
thought,
you want to
yes.
hear me again.
I'm sorry. Pardon me. I apologize.
It's okay.
All right, is that all the callers we have?
I believe so. Looks like we have a clean slate.
Okay, so we'll close public comment. And with that, that brings us to the end of our agenda for today. I want to thank all the members for your comments, as well as the public for your comments as well. And with that, we'll adjourn today's meeting. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.